Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be going over my thoughts on PMQs, with the two main topics of discussion being the growing humanitarian crisis in Israel and Palestine, and closer to home, the crisis in housing. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, sorry, this is going to be a long one, but that's because it covers two very, very difficult and different issues. You know, the Tories abandoning those in need in the UK, and others in the Middle East abandoning reason. So before I get onto the two main topics, both of which actually represent in their own ways the absolute battering of innocent people purely at the interests of a few greedy individuals, the proceedings actually had a light-hearted moment near the start, because Keir Starmer began his questions, so to speak, by welcoming the new members of the House, the Labour MPs, for two formerly Conservative seats won in the by-elections last week. And then Sunak joined in by suggesting that he might actually get more support from the new MPs than he did from the old one, suggesting that they weren't actually in tune with Labour policy, which I don't think is quite true. But of course, what he was really doing was having a dig at Nadine Dorries, who will have probably thrown her bottle of gin at the telly watching it. But in terms of the more serious questions, so Starmer was asking about housing policy for both those with mortgages and those renting. And for those who think, well, this is a less serious issue than what's going on in the Middle East, it's actually, no, you're completely wrong. As I've discussed before and will again, we can do nothing to stop the barbarism currently exploding in the Middle East on either side. We've got absolutely no power over either side. That's not to say we should ignore it, but our influence there is very small and our power is zero. However, we can choose to address the suffering of people in this country in a very meaningful way. The problems people have with, say, housing, which is a key concern right now, are the result of political choices. And yes, that includes voting behaviour as well as the decisions of politicians. But they're choices that were made here in the UK. They weren't influenced internationally. And different choices made here in the UK can result in different outcomes. So this topic is actually more important. You know, you have to, I think some people may have to ask themselves what sort of person they are. If they want politicians to spend all their time talking about a conflict in some other part of the world that they cannot possibly influence, rather than events in this country that they can. So Starmer's opening salvo referenced the most famous feature of the defeated Conservative candidate for Tamworth, that people struggling with the cost of living should F off. Sunak's initial response to this was to say that he was proud of what his government was doing to support the most vulnerable. Now, just thinking about this politically, what a mad thing to say. Like, here's the thing. What Sunak said has worked in the past. It's like, it's standard. It's a standard response, and it does generally work. But only when those who are really feeling the squeeze are the poorest in society, because they tend not to vote Conservative anyway. A lot of them don't vote at all, unfortunately. But, you know, enraging them, assuming they even paid enough interest to hear what he said, is of low political risk, basically zero political risk for a Tory. But lots of people are feeling the cost of living squeeze now. So the normal playbook's out the window. Middle class voters are feeling it. They don't feel that the government is helping them. The reason why, you know, it normally works for a Conservative Prime Minister to say, oh, we're putting all this help in and this help, it's for those, so that those middle class voters can think, oh, they are trying to help the poor, you know. But when they themselves are struggling, they recognise that that help doesn't exist. Because when you get help for anything, things feel better, don't they? They might not be fixed. You know, if you break your leg and you get medical attention, it'll be a bit better. Your leg's still broken, but it'll feel better. But things feel worse for many people now, including those whom the Conservatives need to target for the election. Insane thing to say. And Starmer's question did the trick as well, because it was trending on Twitter, increasing the chances that it then makes it into reports on PMQs later. But then onto the specific policies. And Starmer wanted to make something of Sunak U-turning again. It's like the second or the third this week. But U-turn again, this on another popular policy this time though. Banning no-fault evictions. Now, this was Conservative policy. Universally approved. There's like no real political argument against it. Oh, but not anymore, because Sunak's canned it. I'm sure it's got nothing to do with the fact that so many Tory MPs are also landlords, and that he's concerned about the possibility of confidence letters now. You know, Sunak had no response to the question specifically about no-fault evictions. In fact, I think he actually made it worse by attacking Labour for opposing the plan to scrap the nutrient neutrality rules, the new housing policy. Like, Sunak's just U-turned on scrapping these rules himself. I talked about that yesterday, I think. Why on earth would he highlight the fact that he now opposes something that Starmer did? Unfortunately, Starmer didn't really point this out. Wish he had done. Never miss an opportunity to show your opponents U-turn to a position you adopted a while ago. But Starmer did talk about the huge increases in like mortgage payments that people are facing, which is putting people who used to get by all right, you know, that's fine, they were getting everything they needed, into the position of now having to choose what are considered essentials. In the case Starmer highlighted between heating and shoes for your child. Sunak tried to suggest that Starmer supported 95% of Liz Truss's mini budget, because that was what this was about. This was about, you know, the mini budget that the Conservatives brought in, and Sunak's trying to say, well, you supported 95% of it, which is a fairly remarkable thing to say, because when Kwasi Kwarteng announced that ill-fated budget statement to the House of Commons last September, Labour's actual response to it was, and I quote, detached from reality. That doesn't sound like support for 95% of it to me. Sunak also talked about rising interest rates as being a global issue. And it's like, well, yeah, it's true. Yeah, absolutely. However, the interest rate rise is still higher in the UK. And more importantly, living standards are falling. Like, they're rising elsewhere. You know, if you've got to find more money to pay for higher mortgages or rents because of the higher costs, the higher interest rates, like, it's easier to manage if your income is at least rising faster than the cost of your other essentials. But in the UK, it's not. That's why people are having to make these sacrifices. Like in the United States, incomes are rising by like 2% more than inflation. In the EU, wages are rising a little bit higher than inflation. It's not as comfortably off as in the US. But in the UK, they're still falling. Like, we had that 1 month, August, I think it was, where it popped its head above. That was it. So if you look at over the last year, say, no, incomes are still below the rate of inflation. So yes, inflation is high across the world. Interest rates are higher across the world. But we are the only comparable economy which is suffering from all the bad. Like the higher interest rates with the higher inflation, with the lower wage growth. Now, I could say, oh, well, Starmer didn't make this point either, but to be fair, that is a bit of a gobful for PMQs. But what he did do was to bring it back to that F-off message from that defeated Tory candidate last week. And the thing is, it's easy to do it because Sunak refused to disown the comments. Like, if Sunak had said, look, that message was offensive and not representative of the Conservative Party, Starmer couldn't have possibly made this stick. It would have been a case of, look, this is a failed candidate who said or did something really stupid a few years ago, clearly out of kilter with his party because his party's disowned the comments, right? But when Sunak defended the behaviour, and he defended it last week, but he also defended it this week, when he didn't have to. The guy's been defeated, you can drop him now. But by doing so, he's made the Conservative Party own it. Foolish. And seized upon by Labour here. As for Sunak insisting that his government were delivering for the people struggling, I do not think that they feel he has. And if the public don't feel that you are delivering, your continued insistence that you are doing is only going to convince them that you've no intention of helping them. Like, it would be different if he acknowledged that not enough was being done, because that's sometimes what you have to do, even if you don't agree with it. You acknowledge their plight, you make it clear that you understand their problems, and you acknowledge that not enough has been done. Then you say what you're going to do to make things better, right? But saying that I've already made things better, that's you basically saying to the voters, that's all the help you're going to get. Well, we haven't had any help. Yeah, but you're not going to get any more. That's just going to cost him more votes. But then on to the international concerns. So the SNP were asking questions regarding the situation in Gaza. I'm actually going to begin with Stuart McDonald. Now, he's not part of the Westminster SNP leadership. He asked the engagement question at the start, but it was a very pertinent question about the fact that 2 million people were being displaced in Gaza. He made it clear that, yes, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, but surely we need to call out breaches of international law when they occur. He said that depriving 2 million people, including 1 million children, of food, water, medicines and fuel is not in accordance with international law. And he asked if Sunak would press for the restoration of these essentials. As a little aside, it's worth noting that some hospital services in Gaza are now having to be suspended due to these shortages. Now, in response, Sunak talked of humanitarian aid and what the UK was doing to fund further humanitarian aid. The problem is that this doesn't address the question. Now, the irony is that Sunak actually did address this question, but later on. I don't get why he didn't do it there and then. Because McDonnell wasn't asking about humanitarian aid. He was talking about the supply of essential resources into the region. Water, food, medicines and fuel from the usual supplies. Not humanitarian aid is like unusual supplies, extra supplies, where the normal ones have been shut off. McDonnell was asking about the normal supplies of these things, the basic infrastructure. And you get, this is a conflict that no sitting MP is responsible for, even partially. It's also a conflict over which we have no real influence. We have no power at all, not really much influence. I've already made that point in previous videos and I'll keep making it here. So we can't actually expect Sunak to do something that will really help, right? Much less to avert disaster in Gaza right now. Sunak is powerless. Even a good, and that's not a reflection on him, even a good prime minister would ultimately be powerless. In a situation like this, as uncomfortable as it might be for some, persuasion is all we have. Words, that's all we have. But Sunak will not have those words listened to by the Israeli government to do anything if he loudly accuses them of war crimes, even if it's true. Like, we can see the reaction when the UN has said, look, this is clearly war crimes. The Israeli government flipped its lid. What a remarkable, absolutely ridiculous reaction from them. Overreaction. And that is what would happen if Sunak did the same thing. Like, we can call out the war crimes of Hamas and Putin more clearly because there's no persuading them of anything anyway. So, why would you play along? But the Israeli government, we might be able to get something. But Sunak, he had the power to stand up and say, look, neither innocent Israelis nor Palestinians should be made to suffer. He did say that international law should be respected, which is fine. But why was he unable to acknowledge the innocent suffering in Gaza, even if he puts it squarely at the feet of Hamas? Like, if he can't make a more nuanced statement, why didn't he at least do that? Like, if nothing else, then for those struggling with the conflict in this country, it would have addressed the question. It would have said what Sunak was going to do about it. Everyone in that chamber knows there's nothing he can do, nor any of them were they in the same position, right? And the unhelpfulness of the response was really weird because, like I said, he seemed to be able to say more when he was asked about something slightly different by Mary Black, deputy leader of the SNP. So later on, she used both of her questions to ask about calling for a ceasefire. And it was really weird. It was like that sketch. I can't remember who did it. Was it Two Ronnie's sketch where it's like a mastermind, but they're answering the previous question? It was like the same thing. So Mary Black asks about a ceasefire, and then Rishi Sunak answers McDonnell's question from earlier on about basic supplies and international law. So she asks about a ceasefire. Sunak's response, it was good and bad in equal measure. The good bit was, which was actually more of his response to the second question. He said that Israel should follow international law and that he would continue to urge Israel to follow international law. Now, nuanced, but that is the closest you are going to get to an admission right now from the British government that Israel is not following international law. Also, because words are worthless unless they achieve something, it's also a statement that says, look, behind the scenes, we are discussing with Israel rather more frankly than we can in public. In other words, the government is talking about international law with the Israeli government in diplomatic terms. But his initial response was less encouraging. He said that the most important principle is that Israel has the right to defend itself under international law. Now, again, you appreciate the continued reference to international law. I've made it clear that I've no time for people who only want to point fingers at one side on this issue. You either point fingers wherever human rights laws are breached or you don't care about human rights, right? But saying that Israel's right to defend itself is the most important principle, that is wrong. It's saying that innocent Palestinian deaths are of lower priority than innocent Israeli deaths, right? Well, that's not right. And although I appreciate the difficulty the government's in, if it wants to actually achieve any good at all with next to no influence and absolutely no power, I don't see why he needed to say that. You know, he knew what sort of questions would come up about this. He would have had his responses prepared very carefully, every word. He can achieve nothing extra with that statement, so why make it? Why not just insist that Israel's priority is the rescue of their hostages, which is what I would prefer it if our political leaders were saying that as well, because like Starmer and Sunak are both talking about Israel's right to defend itself. It's like, yes, that's fine. Can we be a bit more specific? Can we say to rescue their hostages? You know, why not say Israel's priority is the rescue of their hostages and they have the right to do so within international law, and that we have called upon Hamas to release them in the interest of the safety of the Palestinian people? Could he not say that? That doesn't enrage Israel, does it? But such is the bullshit raging on this issue, which is why I'd say that if most of the people who want to talk about this issue aren't actually interested in the innocent lives being lost on both sides, if they're actively seeking the conflict until one side is completely wiped out, because that's what it is. Whenever you've got people going, oh, but this was terrible human rights breaches. Oh, that was terrible human. Very few of those people are pointing both ways. It's just one way, which basically means they want the conflict. Some of them are explicitly urging the conflict, urging it, which is basically, if you urge conflict, you urge the loss of life. You know, and it's like they're only going to be happy when one side has wiped the other out. And the Israel and Palestine conflict's always weaponized by people in this country. They love it when things like this happens. Both left and right, the ones who absolutely love it, because they suddenly become more important. They raise their profile because people want to listen to them now, because it's their thing, right? And most of them have got no problem monetizing that. You know, what I will reiterate is that all we can do is supply humanitarian aid. That's all we can do. And try to reason behind the scenes. And we'll probably not succeed very much. Obviously, neither you nor I can actually help with the reasoning. We can't do that. It's like, you know, people will want to feel, what can we do to help? Well, we can't do that. So all we can actually do is help with the humanitarian effort. You know, you could, for example, donate to organisations like the British Red Cross. That's what I've done. That's what we can do. You can write to your MP if you like. Absolutely. Make your position clear. Why not? But what are you going to ask them to do? What will you ask them to do that will make even the slightest difference? I had to laugh when I saw a letter being sent by a load of Muslim councillors to Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner calling for a ceasefire. And I thought, what? Even President Biden couldn't call for a ceasefire. And unlike Sunak, he's been very vocal about the suffering of innocent Palestinians. That's why I don't get Sunak. Like, if Biden can say that, and we know what the situation is in America, if Biden can say, actually, we need to be thinking about innocent Palestinians as well, you know, why can't Sunak? But if Biden, supposedly the most powerful man in the Western world, if he cannot arrange for a ceasefire without trying to just persuade it out of Israel, how the hell does anyone think that someone who's not even a member of a government in a powerless country as far as this conflict is concerned can possibly do anything to bring it about? Or are they just getting it in the neck from people locally and it's just easier for them to pass the buck? Is that what the letter's about? I don't know. But it is vaguely ridiculous. People need to think to themselves, yes, it's a terrible human rights tragedy. What can we do here? Bog all. But there's human rights tragedies going on in Britain right now. What can we do about that? That's down to us. That's entirely down to us. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.